Colorado Territory, winter of 1873. Snow fell thick as flour from a torn sack, blurring the world into shades of white and gray. In the mining town of Leadville, where fortunes rose and died faster than a candle flame in the wind, a young seamstress named Clara Bennett pushed through the cold like someone with no choice but forward. Her wool shawl was thin, her gloves were patched, but the bundle in her arms was worth more than both put together. Inside it lay a hand-stitched bison coat, lined with rabbit fur, the finest piece she had made all season. One mistake in the stitching, Mrs. Henley had warned, and Clara would lose the winter contract. Lose the contract, and she'd lose her room. Lose her room, and she'd lose her place in town. Clara knew too well that people like her didn't get second chances. The trail up to the Thornton claim twisted through a thick pine forest. The storm clouds were already rolling in from the peaks, heavy and dark. Clara forced herself to move faster, her breath coming in white clouds. She had walked harsher trails before, walked them hungry, walked them alone. She wasn't afraid of snow, she was afraid of failure. When she reached the clearing, she froze. The Thornton cabin wasn't the rough hunting shack she had expected. It was a large, two-story log home with real glass windows and two chimneys sending smoke into the sky. This was the kind of house built by people who never worried about tomorrow. Clara knocked. After a moment, the door opened, revealing a grizzled man with sharp eyes. He looked at her like she was a stranger selling snake oil. "What do you want?" "Delivery for Miss Thornton," Clara said, gripping the bundle. "The coat from Mrs. Henley's shop." He grunted and stepped aside. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of pine wood. She heard voices in another room. A young woman stepped in, Miss Thornton. Her dress was fine wool, dyed deep green, with stitching Clara could only dream of making one day. Her hair was pinned up, like she'd stepped off a train from Denver. But Clara barely noticed her, because standing behind the young woman was a man who made her breath stop. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, a face shaped by mountain life, and pale eyes that looked like creek water over stone. He didn't look at her with judgment like the others. He looked at her like he was trying to understand her, read her, see her. Miss Thornton snapped her fingers sharply. "Well, show me the coat." Clara unwrapped the bundle carefully, laying it across a bench. Her fingers were tired and cracked from weeks of sewing, but her work was flawless. She'd checked every seam twice. Miss Thornton didn't care. She poked the fur with her finger. "This fur doesn't lie flat, and this stitching uneven. I can't pay for low-quality goods." Clara felt heat rise in her chest. The coat was perfect. She opened her mouth to defend her work, but Miss Thornton cut her off. "I didn't ask you to speak." Clara swallowed her pride. She'd had worse. People with money always thought they owned the air around them. Miss Thornton turned to the man behind her. "Edward, what do you think? Will it do?" He stepped forward, and when he lifted the coat, his hands looked too careful, too experienced for a simple mountain man. He touched the seams like he understood the work behind them. Finally, he looked up. Their eyes met again. "It's exceptional," he said quietly. "Whoever made this knows what they're doing." Clara's heart beat faster for reasons she didn't understand. Miss Thornton's face tightened. "Fine. Father will send payment later." Clara wrapped the coat in silence. She didn't expect kindness. She only wanted fairness. As she reached the door, a warm hand closed around hers. Edward pressed coins into her palm. "For the trail," he said softly. "It's rough this time of year." Clara nodded once, grateful and embarrassed. She stepped outside just as the wind picked up. She didn't know Edward Blackwood was still watching her as she walked away into the storm, her shawl pulled tight, her pride holding her upright. She didn't know he had memorized her stubborn posture, the way she refused to shrink, the way she protected her dignity even when others tried to break it. She didn't know she had just changed something inside him, something he thought had died 3 years earlier with his wife. The blizzard struck halfway down the trail. Snow whipped around Clara, turning the world into a blur. Her fingers went numb, her boots slipped on frozen mud. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. By the time she reached town, she was shaking with cold. Inside Mrs. Henley's boarding house, she barely had time to breathe before the woman appeared with a sharp look. "You're late, and we got a message from the Thornton place." Clara's stomach dropped. They said the coat was poorly made, stitching uneven, fur mismatched. "I can't afford complaints from people like them. You're done here, Clara. Out by morning." The floor felt like it tilted beneath her. Her job, gone. Her room, gone. Her place in town, gone. Just like that. She climbed the stairs to pack the few things she owned. A spare dress, a sewing kit, a worn photograph. Everything fit into one small canvas bag. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at the dim candle. Tomorrow she would be homeless in the dead of winter. Then came a knock. She opened the door, expecting one of the other girls. Instead, Edward Blackwood stood in the hallway, snow melting from his coat, his pale eyes serious. "Miss Bennet," he said softly, "I heard what happened. May I come in? We need to talk." And Clara realized her life was about to change again, this time in a way she never imagined. Clara stood in the doorway, exhausted, cold and out of options. Letting a strange man into her tiny room at night was improper, reckless even. But something in Edward Blackwood's eyes made her step aside without thinking. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was something closer to respect. He remained by the door, hat in hand, tall enough that his shoulders nearly brushed the ceiling. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "about what happened at the Thornton place. Your work was perfect. Victoria was looking for someone to blame, and you were convenient." Clara kept her chin up. "I don't need your apologies, Mr. Blackwood." "I know," he answered, "but you deserve better than what was done to you." The room fell silent except for the wind whining against the walls. Then Edward took a breath, as if bracing himself. "I'm going to say something that will sound strange, maybe impossible, but I need you to hear me out before you refuse." Clara crossed her arms. "Then say it." "I need a wife," he said bluntly. Clara blinked. "A what?" "A wife," Edward repeated. "Not for love, not for comfort. For survival." Clara stared at him, stunned. He went on, voice steady. "There's trouble brewing in this territory. Dangerous men, dangerous interests. A married man draws less suspicion. People stop asking questions. They assume he's settled." "And you want me to pretend to be your wife?" she whispered. Edward nodded. "In exchange, you'll have food, warmth, safety through the winter. Your own room, your own space. I'll never touch you without your permission. I give you my word." Clara felt her breath shaking. "Why me?" "Because you're strong," he said simply. "Because you don't back down. Because you walked through a blizzard alone and still defended your work with your head held high. And because—" he hesitated, "because you have nothing left to lose. Just like me." His honesty hit her harder than any insult ever had. Nothing left to lose. It was true, and that truth terrified her. "This is madness," she whispered. "We barely know each other." "I know," Edward said softly, "but it's still better than you freezing outside tomorrow." The candle flickered, throwing shadows across the room. Clara looked at her sewing kit, the only valuable thing she owned. At her canvas bag. At the thin walls that wouldn't keep out the cold waiting for her in the morning. Then she lifted her chin. "All right," she said. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." Edward didn't smile. He only stepped forward and offered his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. Before dawn, in the cold clerk's office, they stood side by side. The preacher rushed through the vows, barely awake. The blacksmith and his wife served as witnesses. Edward slipped a simple silver band onto her finger. It was warm, as if he'd been holding it in his hand for hours. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said. Edward met her eyes, asking silently. Clara gave the smallest nod. His lips touched hers, light, respectful, warm, and then it was done. Clara Bennet became Clara Blackwood. 2 hours later, they were riding into the high country on Edward's horse. His arm rested around her waist to steady them both. It was the first time in years someone had held her, even in this practical way. She tried to ignore the way her heart reacted. The cabin emerged from the trees like a secret. Surrounded by ridges, sheltered from wind, a creek nearby. But the cabin was not what she expected from a ruined man. It was sturdy, large, and built with care. The windows had real glass. The furniture was handcrafted. There were books, dozens of them. This was not the home of a poor trapper. Inside, Edward showed her a small room with a bed, a chest, and a window overlooking the creek. "This is yours," he said. "I'll sleep in the loft." She nodded, grateful for the privacy. Days passed. Edward left early each morning to check trap lines. He returned late with furs and snow still clinging to his coat. He didn't talk much, but he wasn't unkind. He brought her coffee, sugar, a new wool blanket without comment. Clara cooked because it gave her something to do. Venison stew, cornbread, dried apples simmered in cinnamon water. Edward ate quietly, but always thanked her. When visitors came, traders, neighbors, wandering preachers, they played the part well. Clara fixed her apron. Edward put on an easy smile. They looked like every other newlywed couple in the mountains. But behind closed doors, they lived like strangers who respected each other's space. And slowly, something began to shift. Clara noticed how Edward's voice softened when he said her name, how he fixed loose boards without being asked, how he never forgot to knock on her door. Edward noticed how Clara's laughter returned little by little, how she moved through the cabin like she belonged, how she challenged him when he tried to hide behind his quiet ways. They were not lovers, they were not friends, but they were something fragile, something real. One evening, Clara was searching for a book when she found a board that moved. Behind it, a hidden compartment held papers, mining claims, investments, legal documents. Her breath caught. Edward Blackwood wasn't poor, he wasn't ruined. He was someone else entirely, someone hiding. Before she could process what that meant, a knock shattered the silence. Edward went tense instantly. Clara's heart pounded as he opened the door. 3 men on horseback waited outside, their faces cold and unfriendly. The leader tipped his hat. "Blackwood," he said. "Mr. Thornton wants a word." Clara saw Edward's hand tighten on the door. The man's smile was mocking. "And it'd be a shame," he said slowly, "if your pretty wife got caught between you and your old mistakes." Clara froze. Edward's jaw turned to stone. "You should leave," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The men rode off with a threat hanging heavy in the air. Edward closed the door, breathing hard. Clara stepped closer. "What's happening?" He met her eyes. "Pack your things," he said. "Now, you're not safe here." Clara's heart dropped. "Edward, who are you?" He hesitated. For the first time since she met him, he looked afraid. "Someone with enemies?" he whispered. "And someone who can't lose you." Clara froze at Edward's words. Someone who can't lose you. They echoed in her mind like a heartbeat she wasn't ready to face. But there was no time to question it. Edward grabbed her canvas bag from the corner, stuffing her sewing kit inside with a speed that told her the danger was real. "Edward," Clara said, stepping toward him, "tell me what's going on." He stopped, his hand still on the bag. "James Thornton," he said quietly, "and I have a history. A dangerous one. Before I came to Colorado, before the trap lines, before I stepped into this cabin as a ruined man, I was part of a mining company in California. Thornton was my partner." "Partner?" Clara whispered. "Yes, until greed twisted everything." His jaw clenched. "When a rich claim came in, Thornton wanted full control. He caused an Mar accident in the mine. 3 men died. One of them was my closest friend. I confronted him. He threatened me. I couldn't prove what he'd done, but I knew he'd come after me next." "So you ran," Clara said softly. "I ran," Edward agreed. "Took my share of the money. Disappeared into the mountains. Let the world think I'd lost everything. I built a life under a false version of myself. A quiet trapper with nothing worth noticing." "And the cabin," Clara murmured. "The books, the claims." Edward nodded. I've been buying land slowly, carefully, using proxies. Thornton didn't know who controlled those claims, not until recently. And now he wants you gone, Clara said. More than that, Edward answered. He wants me erased. Clara felt a chill run through her, colder than the mountain storms. What about me? Edward swallowed. He'll use you to hurt me if he can. That's why you have to go to town. Morrison's store. His daughter Sarah has a safe room. You'll stay with her until I handle this. Clara's heart pounded. Handle this? How? I'm going to confront Thornton, Edward said simply. End this before he brings violence to the mountains. Before he brings it to you. No, Clara gasped. He'll kill you. Edward, you can't go alone. I have no choice. Clara grabbed his arm. Then I'm going with you. He shook his head instantly. Absolutely not. You don't get to decide that. Edward's voice broke. I can't risk losing you. For one moment the world stopped. The crackling fire, the howl of the wind, the weight of the mountains pressing against the cabin walls. Then Clara stepped back. Fine, she whispered. But if you're going to risk everything, then so am I. Edward left her in town the next morning with Morrison and Sarah, who welcomed Clara with quiet concern. But Clara didn't stay in the warm little room like Edward had hoped. Instead, she watched, she listened, and she gathered information. Men talked loosely around women they thought were unimportant. And Clara, silent, invisible Clara, was easy to overlook. She overheard two of Thornton's men talking near the store. Blackwood's heading through Devil's Pass tomorrow, one said. Boss said, make sure he don't come out the other side. Clara's blood turned to ice. They were planning an ambush. Not a meeting, not a warning, a killing. Clara didn't wait. She didn't sleep. She didn't cry. She planned. By dawn, she walked into the Thornton mining office with her chin high, her coat buttoned tight, her heart pounding but her voice steady. I need to speak to Mr. Thornton, she told the clerk. Tell him Mrs. Edward Blackwood wishes to discuss business. Business. That word always made powerful men listen. James Thornton welcomed her with a false smile and cold eyes. Well, he said, I never expected to meet the wife of the man who's been causing me so much trouble. Clara sat with perfect posture, hands folded neatly in her lap. I'm here, she said, to offer you a way out. Thornton laughed. A way out? My dear, your husband is the one in trouble. No, Clara said. You are. She laid out everything she knew, the claims, the proxy names, the documents she had found in Edward's cabin. She spoke calmly, clearly, each word cutting like a blade. If you harm my husband, Clara said, these letters, she tapped the sealed envelope she had prepared, will go to the governor, the Denver newspapers, and your financial backers. All of them. Thornton's smile vanished. You're bluffing, he said. Test me, Clara answered. Silence filled the room like smoke. Finally, Thornton slammed a fist on the desk. What do you want? $30,000, Clara said, in exchange for the claims, and you leave Edward alone. Forever. Thornton's face twisted. 30,000? You little... Clara stood. You have until noon tomorrow. If you refuse, the letters go out and your empire burns. Then she walked away, her hands trembling the moment she was out of sight. She feared she had just signed her own death sentence. But she feared losing Edward more. When Edward returned to town that night, he stormed into Morrison's store, breathless and furious. What did you do? He demanded, finding Clara waiting. She told him everything. The bluff, the documents, the threat, the meeting. Edward ran a hand over his face and sank into a chair. You're terrifying, he whispered. Terrifying and brilliant. Clara crossed her arms. You were riding straight into a trap. Someone had to save you. Edward stared at her. Then he laughed, a sound that shook loose a piece of the heaviness he'd been carrying for years. I married the wrong woman, he said softly. I should have married a general. Clara felt heat rush to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. You married someone who refuses to lose you. The next morning a rider arrived with an envelope from Thornton himself. Inside was a signed agreement and a bank draft for $30,000. Clara's bluff had worked. Edward read the document, exhaled slowly, then looked at her with something raw and unguarded. "You saved me," he said. "No," Clara whispered. "We saved each other." Quote, Edward took her hands. For the first time, there was no hesitation, no arrangement, no pretending. He pulled her close and kissed her, not with caution, not with reservation, but with the certainty of a man who had finally found home. Clara kissed him back, her hands on his chest, the truth settling in her heart like warmth from a long-fought fire. They weren't strangers. They weren't an arrangement. They were partners, built from hardship, sharpened by danger, bound by choice. That spring, they used part of the money to open a seamstress shop in Leadville. Clara hired women who had been mistreated the same way she once had. Edward handled the books, investing wisely, quietly building the future they deserved. By summer, they weren't just married by name, they were married in every way that mattered. The ruined mountain man was never ruined. The seamstress was never powerless. And together they built a life stronger than the mountains around them. A life made of truth. A life made of partnership. A life made of love.